Have you ever wondered what life was like thousands of years ago, in one of the very first civilizations on Earth? In the heart of Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, a Sumerian peasant awakens to a day that has repeated itself for generations, yet each day carries its own rhythm, its own labor, and its own quiet struggles. This is a glimpse into the life of one man whose hands shape the soil, whose eyes follow the changing light, and whose heartbeat echoes the pulse of the first cities humankind ever built. The sun had not yet fully risen, but the horizon already glimmered with soft amber hues that stretched across the fertile floodplains. The Sumerian peasant stirred in his simple reed and mud brick dwelling, the scent of damp earth lingering in the cool morning air. His body, conditioned by years of daily toil, moved almost automatically, lifting the coarse mat from the floor to sweep the scattered straw and dirt. Outside, the sounds of life were already stirring, birds chirped cautiously, and the distant lowing of oxen hinted at the day's work ahead. He stepped barefoot onto the warm, uneven ground, feeling the textures of mud hardened overnight and the occasional shard of broken pottery beneath his feet. The river, a lifeline of his village, reflected the first streaks of light, a ribbon of silver that promised both sustenance and toil. His first task was to tend to the small plot of barley he had planted weeks before. The soil, dark and rich from the annual floods, clung stubbornly to his fingers as he loosened it around the tender stalks. His hands moved with a rhythm honed through years of experience, knowing exactly when to pull weeds, when to pat down the earth, and when to coax the plants with water from the nearby canal. The simple act of tending the crop was more than labor, it was a conversation with the land, an understanding that survival depended on the balance between human effort and the generosity of the rivers. He paused for a moment to glance toward the village. Smoke spiraled lazily from other dwellings, and figures moved with the same purpose and caution as he did, each enacting a rhythm dictated by the sun and the seasons. His stomach reminded him of the small meal he had hastily eaten before dawn, crumbs of bread made from last year's grain, a few dates, and a sip of sour milk. It was a meager sustenance, but enough to fuel the start of the day. By mid-morning, the sun rose higher, casting longer shadows and warming the earth beneath his feet. The peasant adjusted the wooden yoke across his shoulders, preparing to lead his oxen to the larger communal fields that required plowing. The animals moved steadily, responding to the subtle pressure of his hands and the soft murmurs he directed toward them. Each furrow turned over soil rich with nutrients, each step a silent testament to the centuries of practice embedded in the rhythm of Sumerian agriculture. Sweat formed on his brow, and dust clung to his skin, but there was no pause in the momentum. Every action was a step toward survival, toward feeding his family, and toward maintaining the fragile balance between man and earth that had sustained his ancestors. The day continued, stretching onward with labor, the subtle nuances of wind and sunlight, the gentle rustle of reeds along the canal, and the occasional call of birds who had already begun their own routines. Time seemed both endless and fleeting, measured in tasks completed, seeds planted, and the anticipation of water reaching the fields at the precise moment. Even in these early hours, there was a sense of continuity, a thread connecting the past to the present, woven into the very soil beneath his hands. The peasant moved through his small dwelling with deliberate care, each motion honed by years of repetition. The walls, crafted from sun-dried mud bricks, retained the faint warmth of the previous day, and the uneven floor beneath his feet creaked softly as he stepped over scattered straw and shards of pottery. The faint scent of last night's fires lingered in the air, mingling with the earthy aroma of the mud walls and the occasional waft of herbs drying on a small rack in the corner. He reached for the clay water jug placed near the doorway, lifting it with a practiced grip and pouring a few swallows into his cupped hands. The cool liquid refreshed his dry throat and invigorated his muscles, readying them for the work that awaited. Outside, the village had begun to stir in earnest. Smoke curled from other dwellings, and the low murmur of labor carried on the morning breeze. Children padded barefoot along the narrow mud pathways, their small baskets clutched tightly as they chased one another toward the river. The peasant observed them with a distant fondness, their laughter and hurried steps reminded him that life, while burdensome, was not without fleeting moments of lightness. He took a brief pause, allowing his eyes to follow the horizon where the first golden rays of sun stretched across the flat floodplains, illuminating the reeds and water channels that fed the fields. The rivers gleamed like molten silver, and he imagined the hidden currents beneath the surface, carrying nutrients to sustain the crops that were the foundation of their survival. Turning his attention to the small plot of barley just beyond the dwelling, he knelt in the soft soil, feeling its cool granules sift between his fingers. The barley stalks, though still young, stood firm, their green shoots resilient against the seasonal wind. He began the delicate task of removing weeds that threatened to choke the young plants, careful not to disturb the fragile roots. Each motion was measured, a rhythm that mirrored the gentle flow of the rivers, a quiet understanding that the land would give life only when tended with patience and care. Occasionally, he paused to inspect the leaves, noting subtle changes in color or texture, signs that could mean either growth or the onset of disease. The responsibility pressed heavily on him. The success of the harvest dictated whether his family would endure the coming months or face hunger. After tending the barley, he turned to the task of preparing the communal canal for irrigation. With a worn wooden spade, he cleared debris and adjusted small clay barriers that controlled the water flow. The canal, a lifeline for every field in the village, demanded constant attention. Even a small obstruction could prevent water from reaching the most distant plots, and the peasant understood that his diligence contributed to the well-being of his neighbors as much as his own. As he worked, the sun rose higher, warming the mud beneath his feet and casting long, sharp shadows that marked the passage of time. Beads of sweat formed along his brow and trickled down his temple, carried away by the dry morning wind. In the distance, he noticed the oxen of other villagers beginning their day's labor. Their low, measured calls resonated across the fields, a sound both comforting and a reminder of the vast network of effort that sustained their small society. The peasant took a moment to inspect his own animals, ensuring that their yoke was secure and that the wooden plow would not break under the strain of the heavy, damp soil. The oxen moved with a quiet understanding of the work ahead, their large, steady steps a counterpoint to the human rhythm guiding them. By mid-morning, the peasant's body was fully awake, conditioned to the exertion that defined his existence. Each action, the bending, the lifting, the precise placement of each spadeful of earth, was performed with meticulous attention, a language without words that spoke of centuries of inherited knowledge. The village itself had come alive now, a chorus of movement and sound, women carrying water, men repairing tools, children running errands. Yet amid the activity, there remained a profound solitude. His mind, though occupied with practical concerns, found space for observation, the way sunlight shimmered on the canal water, the patterns of birds in flight, the faint, almost imperceptible tremor of the wind through the barley fields. As the morning drew on, he took a brief moment to rest, leaning against the wooden frame of a nearby shed. He observed the life around him, the interplay of humans, animals, and land, the delicate balance that allowed their small community to persist. Though fatigue began to settle into his muscles, there was satisfaction in the knowledge that each small effort contributed to something greater, the continuity of life, the sustenance of family, and the harmony of a village bound together by labor, water, and the enduring rhythm of the land. Slowly, he prepared to transition from these morning tasks to the more intensive labor awaiting in the wider fields, carrying with him the quiet understanding that every movement, every decision, every drop of sweat was part of the same enduring story. By late morning, the peasant shifted from tending his small personal plot to the expansive communal fields that stretched toward the horizon. These fields were the backbone of the village's survival, long rectangular swaths of earth divided by narrow irrigation canals and raised embankments, a testament to generations of careful planning and labor. The air was warmer now, filled with the faint, metallic scent of sun-baked soil and the sweet aroma of ripening barley from neighboring plots. His hands, calloused and strong, grasped the wooden plow, feeling the familiar weight against his shoulders as he guided the oxen toward the first row. The animals, steady and obedient, responded to the subtle pressure of the yoke, their heavy steps imprinting deep furrows into the soft mud. As he worked, the peasant's mind remained alert to every detail of the land. The soil varied subtly in texture, denser in some places, lighter in others, a shift that required him to adjust the pressure and depth of the plow. Small clods of earth broke apart under the blade, exposing tiny worms and insects that enriched the soil, reminders of the unseen life supporting their crops. Occasionally, a stray bird swooped close, darting after insects disturbed by the plow, and he watched with a quiet fascination, noting the patterns of flight and the interplay of predator and prey that mirrored the balance in his own life. Around him, the village seemed to breathe collectively, each sound a thread in a larger tapestry. In the distance, women carried bundles of reeds for construction, their rhythmic steps echoing against the ground. Children, dismissed from minor chores, ran along the embankments, their laughter rising and falling like wine through the fields. Other men guided oxen in parallel rows, the repetitive thrum of labor uniting them in purpose, though each carried his own burdens, worries, and quiet hopes. Despite the shared work, there was a sense of individual responsibility. Every furrow plowed, every weed removed, every careful adjustment to the irrigation system contributed directly to the sustenance of families, to the continuity of the village. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became more insistent. Sweat ran freely down the peasant's face, traced lines along his neck, and dampened the back of his coarse linen tunic. His muscles, trained through years of similar labor, moved with a fluid efficiency, yet fatigue crept in steadily. He paused briefly, leaning on the plow, breathing in the sharp, dry air, and allowed himself a fleeting glance at the distant river, whose glimmering surface promised water, relief, and life. He thought of the canals that would carry its flow to every furrow, of the delicate timing that had to be maintained to prevent flooding or drought, and of the silent understanding that guided every villager in their shared toil. After resuming work, he encountered the stubborn patches of soil that resisted the plow. Here, he employed a different technique, loosening the ground with a handheld hoe before guiding the oxen over it again. Each adjustment required careful thought and coordination, a combination of experience, instinct, and intuition passed down through generations. The peasant's eyes, accustomed to reading subtle changes in the earth, noted the moisture content, the way light reflected off the furrows, and the faint scent that indicated fertile soil. This intimate knowledge of land and labor formed a silent dialogue between human and nature, a communication that demanded respect, patience, and unwavering attention. By midday, the furrows had multiplied, rows stretching toward the edge of the horizon, each line a record of hours spent in tireless effort. The peasant stepped back occasionally to examine his work, the patterned symmetry of the plowed fields creating a quiet, almost meditative order amidst the chaos of sun, wind, and movement. In these moments, fatigue softened into a sense of accomplishment. The rhythm of labor, the tangible evidence of diligence etched into the land, offered a profound satisfaction. Though the day was far from over, the knowledge that the fields were prepared for the coming growth provided a deep sense of purpose, a reassurance that survival, though never guaranteed, was steadily secured through effort, skill, and unwavering dedication. As midday deepened, the sun reached its zenith, casting a harsh, golden glare over the fields. The peasant's skin glistened with sweat, each movement sending grains of dust into the air, which shimmered in the sunlight like tiny motes of gold. Despite the fatigue pressing on his muscles, he maintained a steady pace, guided by the unspoken rhythm of the land and the quiet determination instilled in him since childhood. The distant river reflected the brilliance of the day, its surface rippling with a gentle current, a reminder that water, the essence of life in Mesopotamia, flowed not just through the canals but through every task and every effort he undertook. He paused for a moment beside the main canal, watching the water's surface and feeling the cool breeze drifting across the plain. The canal had been carefully managed over generations, lined with clay and reinforced with reeds, its flow critical to the crops that would feed the village. He dipped a cupped hand into the water, feeling its refreshing chill, and poured it over his brow. The sensation, though fleeting, revived his spirit, a small ritual that connected him to the unseen forces sustaining their community. The canal, the river, the very soil beneath his feet, all were parts of a delicate balance that demanded respect, patience, and attentiveness. Returning to the plow, he focused on the task of straightening the furrows, ensuring that each row aligned precisely with the next. Even small deviations could disrupt irrigation or impede the growth of barley and wheat, so his attention was meticulous. He adjusted the oxen's pace, nudged the plow's blade to penetrate the denser soil, and monitored every subtle shift in the earth. The repetitive motion, though taxing, carried a meditative quality. Each step, each push, each scrape of the plow against the soil reinforced his connection to the land, the rhythm of life, and the responsibilities he bore as a provider. Occasionally, the peasant's gaze wandered to the surrounding landscape. Beyond the cultivated fields stretched patches of wild reeds, small groves of date palms, and the faint outlines of neighboring villages along the riverbanks. Birds glided across the sky in coordinated arcs, their shadows flickering over the fields, while insects buzzed amid the barley, each fulfilling its role in the intricate ecosystem. He observed these patterns with quiet appreciation, noting how every element, from the smallest insect to the flowing river, contributed to the continuity of life. The labor of humans was entwined with these natural cycles, and understanding them was as critical as the skill required to wield the plow. The sun climbed higher, and the heat grew oppressive, pressing down upon the peasant and the oxen alike. Sweat soaked his tunic, clung to the nape of his neck, and dripped from his forearms, yet the work could not pause. Survival demanded persistence. He adjusted the yoke, shifted the plow's angle, and continued to guide the animals with precise commands, their large bodies moving in concert with his own. Each furrow completed brought a tangible sense of progress, a visible mark of effort that would yield sustenance in the weeks to come. As the morning melted into afternoon, the peasant's thoughts turned briefly to the village and his family. The small dwelling where he would later rest, the simple meal waiting to replenish him, and the presence of kin and neighbors, all these were rewards for the unending labor. The rhythm of the day, the heat of the sun, the texture of the soil beneath his hands, and the soft murmur of water in the canals combined into a profound awareness that life, though demanding, was structured, purposeful, and shared. In these moments, despite fatigue and sweat, he felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of harmony born from the intimate understanding of land, water, and labor, and the knowledge that each action, however small, contributed to the survival of his family and community. By early afternoon, the intensity of the sun began to press more insistently upon the peasant and the land he tended. Shadows shortened, becoming sharp and distinct across the furrows he had spent hours carving into the earth. Each line of turned soil seemed to hold its own story, a record of sweat, precision, and enduring effort. The heat was relentless, but his movements remained deliberate and practiced, a testament to years of life shaped entirely by labor. Muscles flexed and released in patterns ingrained by repetition, hands roughened by handling tools and soil, arms steady despite fatigue. Every movement reinforced his intimate connection with the land, a bond older than the city walls rising faintly on the horizon. After completing another stretch of furrows, he allowed himself a brief pause. Leaning on the plow, he observed the canal's shimmering surface as it carried water toward the fields, its steady current a silent but vital collaborator in the work he performed. The irrigation system, meticulously designed, demanded constant attention. A misaligned barrier or clogged channel could waste precious water and threaten the crops. The peasant understood this well. He adjusted a small clay partition, shifting it slightly to direct the flow toward a patch of barley that had begun to droop under the sun's intensity. This simple act, repeated countless times by his ancestors, ensured survival and reinforced the delicate relationship between human effort and natural abundance. In the distance, other villagers moved with the same diligence, their forms casting long, angular shadows across the flat plains. Men guided oxen, women carried water or mended woven baskets, and children darted through the narrow paths connecting the fields. Though each performed different tasks, a shared rhythm linked them, a silent understanding that survival required both individual effort and collective coordination. The peasant felt part of a larger network of labor, an invisible thread connecting him to generations past and present. Observing this, he drew a quiet strength, knowing that his work contributed not only to his family but to the continued sustenance of the village as a whole. The peasant returned to his furrows, guiding the oxen with gentle but firm nudges, ensuring the plow cut evenly through the soil. He encountered areas where the earth resisted, clinging stubbornly around rocks or roots, and he adjusted his technique accordingly, using a handheld hoe to loosen the compacted clumps. The repetitive rhythm of work, though exhausting, carried a meditative quality. Each furrow, each movement, and each adjustment formed part of an unbroken chain of understanding between human and land. The barley and wheat he nurtured depended entirely on his attention, patience, and skill. A small miscalculation could ripple outward, affecting not just his immediate plot but the interconnected network of fields around him. As he continued, he noticed subtle changes in the landscape. The breeze shifted slightly, bringing with it the faint scent of distant date palms, and the soft murmur of water in the canals created a soothing background melody. Birds circled above, swooping down occasionally to pluck insects from the newly turned soil, their movements instinctively synchronized with the natural rhythms of the land. The peasant's awareness encompassed every detail: the texture of the soil, the moisture clinging to the roots, the tilt of sunlight on each blade of barley, and the gentle tug of the oxen against the yoke. In these observations, he found both guidance and reassurance, a reminder that attentiveness and understanding were as crucial as physical strength. Mid-afternoon arrived, and the sun's rays began their slow descent, softening the harsh glare but not diminishing the effort required to complete the day's labor. The peasant felt the pull of fatigue more acutely now, muscles heavy, breath measured, but he pressed on. Each furrow completed was a small victory, a visible sign of diligence etched into the landscape. The rhythm of the day, from the quiet dawn through the relentless morning toil to this stage, wove a narrative of survival, dedication, and continuity. He knew that in these moments, every drop of sweat and every exertion of strength contributed to a cycle that had endured for centuries, binding him to the land, the village, and the generations who had walked these fields before him. As the afternoon deepened, the peasant's attention turned from the open fields to the small details that ensured the long-term health of his crops. He moved along the furrows, inspecting the young barley shoots with meticulous care. Some stems were bent under the heat, their tips yellowing slightly, and he gently straightened them, pressing the earth around the roots to reinforce their stability. He noted subtle changes in the soil's moisture, deciding which areas required additional water and which were sufficiently nourished by the canal's steady flow. Every observation carried meaning. In this land, survival depended on understanding the rhythms of the earth, the timing of irrigation, and the delicate balance of sun, soil, and water. The oxen paused occasionally, tired from the steady plowing, and the peasant used these brief interludes to clear small stones and roots from the furrows, ensuring that the plow would continue to slice cleanly through the soil. The repetitive rhythm of labor had become almost meditative, each movement a seamless combination of instinct, muscle memory, and learned skill. Yet the work was never entirely mechanical. The land was alive, unpredictable, and demanding constant attention. A gust of wind carried dust across the fields, and he shaded his eyes to assess its effect on the plants, noting how the young shoots bent and swayed. The tiniest shifts could signal the need for adjustments, whether in irrigation, planting, or manual care, and his practiced eyes detected these signs immediately. While the sun remained high, the village seemed to hum with activity, the distant noises blending into a continuous tapestry of human effort. Women carried water and tended small gardens, men guided oxen or repaired tools, and children ran errands or chased one another along narrow paths. The peasant occasionally glanced toward them, recognizing the silent coordination that bound them all together. Each person's labor, though individual, was part of a larger system, and each furrow he completed, each adjustment to the canal, and each seed nurtured contributed to the village's overall survival. He found a quiet satisfaction in this awareness, a sense of purpose reinforced by the visible results of collective effort. The heat began to soften slightly as the afternoon wore on, though it still pressed heavily against his back and shoulders. Sweat ran freely along his neck and arms, dampening the coarse fabric of his tunic, and dust clung stubbornly to his skin. The oxen's heavy breathing mingled with the rhythmic scraping of the plow, a mechanical song of toil that harmonized with the soft hum of water in the canals. He adjusted the yoke and guided the animals with subtle pressure, ensuring that each line of furrows remained straight, deep, and evenly spaced. Every action was deliberate, a blend of strength, experience, and intuition honed over years of daily labor. During a brief pause, he crouched beside the furrows to examine the soil more closely. Tiny insects scuttled through the earth, breaking down organic matter and enriching the soil, while small birds pecked along the edges in search of nourishment. He observed these creatures without interfering, recognizing their roles in the larger ecosystem. Even amid the intensity of human labor, nature continued its work, and the peasant's understanding of this balance informed every decision he made. The interdependence of human effort and natural cycles was clear, and his respect for this harmony guided the way he worked, ensuring that the land remained productive not just for the present, but for the seasons and generations to come. As the afternoon waned and the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, the peasant completed the final stretch of furrows in this section of the field. A deep sense of accomplishment settled over him, mingled with the exhaustion that had been building steadily throughout the day. The rows of freshly turned soil, straight and precise, stood as tangible evidence of his labor, a silent testament to skill, endurance, and the enduring partnership between human and land. Though more work awaited in other fields and tasks, he allowed himself a brief moment to rest, to feel the warmth of the sun on his back, and to acknowledge the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. As the sun began its slow arc toward the western horizon, the peasant shifted his focus to the wider responsibilities that extended beyond his own small plot. The communal fields required constant vigilance, not only for plowing and irrigation but also for the care of the network of dikes, canals, and embankments that distributed water throughout the village. Each channel, carefully carved into the earth, represented both survival and risk. A small breach could flood a field or leave it parched. With practiced hands, he checked the clay barriers, adjusting their angles, reinforcing weak points with mud and reeds, and ensuring that the water flowed smoothly to every furrow. The process was methodical and demanding, yet it carried a quiet satisfaction, the knowledge that his work, though unseen by many, sustained the life of the entire village. The oxen followed his lead, their steady pace a constant companion in the labor that stretched for hours under the afternoon sun. Each step, each pull of the plow, and each careful adjustment of the furrows was a dance learned over years of repetition. He noticed the subtle cues of the animals, a hesitant movement signaling fatigue, a slight tug suggesting a change in soil resistance, and responded with instinctive guidance. Their partnership was seamless, built on mutual understanding and necessity, and together they transformed raw, unyielding soil into rows capable of sustaining life. Around him, the village remained alive with quiet energy. Children darted along the paths, balancing small bundles of reeds or water, while women worked at the edges of the fields, tending gardens, repairing baskets, or mending worn clothing. Men carried tools to one another, adjusted yokes, or guided their own oxen in parallel lines. Though there was little spoken communication, a rhythm bound their actions together, a collective understanding of timing, labor, and the requirements of survival. Observing this, the peasant felt both a sense of belonging and a solemn responsibility, knowing that the productivity of the fields depended not solely on him, but on the interconnected efforts of the entire community. The heat of the day began to soften as shadows lengthened, casting cool bands across the freshly turned soil. Sweat continued to cling to his skin, and dust settled into the fine lines of his hands and face, but he moved with steady determination. Every adjustment to the furrows, every careful placement of water through the canals, and every observation of the barley and wheat was a step in the ongoing cycle of life. Even minor imperfections required attention, a small patch of soil too dry, a plant bending under the sun, or a stray stone lodged in a furrow could have repercussions if left unchecked. His vigilance was both practical and instinctive, a balance between immediate labor and foresight. During a brief respite, he allowed himself to survey the fields from a slight rise in the land. The pattern of furrows stretched like lines etched into the earth, a testament to hours of labor and careful planning. The river beyond reflected the late afternoon sun, its surface shimmering with the promise of renewal and abundance. Birds wheeled and dipped over the water, insects hummed through the reeds, and the distant calls of villagers blended into a quiet chorus of life sustained by rhythm, labor, and shared purpose. In these moments, the peasant's exhaustion softened, replaced by a profound awareness of continuity, the knowledge that his efforts were part of a story larger than himself, one written over centuries of human endeavor in this fertile land. As the day edged toward evening, the peasant returned once more to his personal plot, performing the final inspections and minor adjustments needed before the day's work could truly end. He straightened the young barley stalks, pressed earth around vulnerable roots, and ensured that water from the canals reached every corner of his responsibility. Each task, though small in isolation, contributed to the larger tapestry of survival and sustenance. He felt the cumulative weight of the day's labor in his shoulders, arms, and back, but also a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the fields, both personal and communal, were prepared for the cycles yet to come. The sun continued its descent, casting a warm glow over the land, signaling the slow transition from labor to rest, from the structured rhythm of day to the approaching calm of evening. As the afternoon sun tilted lower, bathing the fields in warm golden light, the peasant turned his attention to the care of the village's small herd of goats and sheep. These animals, though fewer in number than the oxen, were critical to daily life, providing milk, wool, and occasionally meat. He guided them toward a patch of tender grass near the canal, careful to keep them away from the newly plowed furrows that required protection. Each animal moved with a combination of instinct and habit, responding to his gentle prods and the subtle cues of his voice, forming a partnership similar to that with the oxen but requiring a different kind of attention, softer, slower, and more nuanced. The goats and sheep nibbled at the grass, their movements deliberate, each step pressing into the soft soil, marking it temporarily with small hoofprints. The peasant watched carefully, noting which plants had been grazed too close and which patches required protection. He used small sticks to gently divert the animals from fragile areas, ensuring that no damage was done to either the crops or the irrigation ditches. Though the task seemed minor compared to plowing or managing the canals, it demanded constant vigilance and an intimate understanding of each animal's behavior, for a single misstep could damage young shoots or block the flow of water, setting back hours of careful labor. While attending to the herd, the peasant's gaze often wandered toward the wider landscape. The flat floodplains shimmered in the late afternoon light, a patchwork of green fields, clay canals, and clusters of reeds that swayed with the wind. Beyond, the river wound its way lazily through the plains, reflecting the hues of the setting sun. Birds flew low over the water, dipping and turning in coordinated arcs, and small insects buzzed near the reeds, carrying out their own roles in the natural order. The peasant's mind, though occupied with practical tasks, absorbed these details with quiet reverence, understanding that the life of the village depended on this intricate balance between human effort and the rhythms of the natural world. After ensuring that the animals were secure and had enough to graze, he moved to check the irrigation ditches once more. The water flowed steadily, filling every furrow, reaching even the most distant rows of crops. He adjusted small clay barriers where necessary, observing how the current responded to changes in the channels. Each movement was precise, deliberate, and informed by years of experience. The day's heat had hardened the soil in some areas, and he used a hand tool to gently loosen compacted sections, ensuring that roots could receive adequate water and nutrients. The interplay of labor and observation, action and reaction, required a careful balance of strength, skill, and attentiveness. As shadows grew longer and the sun edged closer to the horizon, the peasant began to gather his tools, stacking the plow, yoke, and spade near the edge of his plot. The animals, now calm and settled, grazed peacefully, their low murmurs mingling with the distant sounds of the village as other villagers returned from the fields. Smoke rose lazily from hearth fires, carrying the aroma of bread baking and small evening meals being prepared. The shift from intense labor to the anticipation of rest was subtle but profound, marking a transition in both the physical and mental rhythms of the day. In these final moments before evening fully settled, the peasant allowed himself a pause, standing in the middle of his plot and surveying the work completed. The furrows stretched in straight, even lines, the young barley stood firm, and the irrigation channels carried water precisely where it was needed. A sense of quiet pride settled over him, tempered by the knowledge that tomorrow would demand the same diligence and care. Yet for now, there was satisfaction in accomplishment, in the visible proof of labor and skill etched into the land, a tangible connection between effort and sustenance, between human life and the enduring rhythm of nature that governed it. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, the peasant shifted from fieldwork to preparing for the evening. The day's labor had left its mark, sweat-dampened clothes clung to his back, dust settled in the lines of his hands and face, and his muscles ached from hours of bending, lifting, and guiding the plow. Yet there was a quiet satisfaction in the ache, a tangible reminder of a day spent in purposeful work. The village, too, had begun its transition from labor to rest. The faint smoke of hearth fires rose in thin spirals from mud brick homes, carrying the scents of bread, boiled grain, and roasted vegetables across the warm air. The peasants' first task was to return the oxen to their pen. Their heavy steps thudded against the packed earth as he guided them carefully along the narrow paths, ensuring they did not stumble over stray stones or uneven ground. The animals, tired yet obedient, moved in steady unison, responding to the subtle pressures of the yoke and the gentle murmurs of their caretaker. Once the oxen were secured, he checked the wooden gates, reinforced the barriers with mud where necessary, and ensured that water and fodder were within reach. Only after confirming that the animals were safe could he turn his attention to the smaller livestock, goats and sheep, which had grazed throughout the late afternoon. The herd moved slowly toward their nighttime enclosure, nudged gently by his hand and guided by the soft voice he reserved for these animals. Each step was deliberate, the peasant's awareness of their needs, vulnerabilities, and patterns allowed him to manage them efficiently, preventing injury or loss. Small branches and reeds were arranged to keep the younger animals from wandering, while the older ones settled into familiar spots, bleating softly as they adjusted to the enclosure. He lingered for a moment, observing their calm after a long day, recognizing that his care had directly ensured their well-being. With the livestock settled, the peasant turned toward the communal storage areas. He checked the irrigation ditches one final time, ensuring that water levels were stable and that the delicate clay barriers were intact. Even minor miscalculations could lead to water loss or uneven distribution, and he had learned from experience that vigilance at the close of day prevented greater difficulties tomorrow. He adjusted a small embankment here, pressed mud over a crack there, and watched the water flow smoothly through the channels. Each action reinforced the delicate balance between human effort and the forces of nature, a balance that defined life in Mesopotamia. The next task was preparation for the evening meal. He gathered simple ingredients stored near his home, small grains, dried herbs, and a handful of dates from the previous harvest. Using a clay bowl, he mixed water and grain to prepare a basic porridge, occasionally stirring the mixture to prevent it from sticking to the edges of the fire-heated clay pot. The aroma of cooking filled the small dwelling, mingling with the lingering scent of earth and sweat, creating a homely atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the open, sun-baked fields. Eating was both a necessity and a quiet ritual, a moment to replenish energy and reflect briefly on the day's work. As he ate, the peasant's thoughts wandered to the patterns of labor, nature, and community he had witnessed throughout the day. The straight furrows, the flowing water, the calm animals, and the subtle harmony of the village all reflected a balance maintained by effort, observation, and skill. Even in this simple meal, there was satisfaction in continuity, the knowledge that what he had done today would feed his family, sustain the crops, and prepare the land for the next day. Shadows lengthened further, and the soft, warm glow of the evening light filled the small space, signaling the transition from the intensity of labor to the quiet of night. As evening deepened and the golden light softened into cooler tones of purple and indigo, the peasant attended to the final chores of the day. The village had quieted, the distant sounds of labor replaced by the low murmur of families settling near their hearths. He checked the small garden near his dwelling, bending to inspect each plant and ensuring that the young shoots had not been disturbed by wind or grazing animals. The subtle rustle of leaves in the evening breeze reminded him of the delicate balance maintained throughout the day, between sun and soil, water and growth, human effort and natural cycles. The oxen and smaller livestock rested peacefully in their enclosures. He ran his hands over their backs, feeling the warmth of their bodies and the slow, steady rise and fall of breathing. The animals had carried him through the day's labor, plowing the fields and responding to his guidance with the silent obedience that only long familiarity could create. Securing them for the night required care, for predators, though rare, could strike if vigilance faltered. He reinforced fences, checked water troughs, and scattered a small ration of fodder, satisfied that the herd would remain safe until the morning. With the livestock settled, he returned to the main dwelling, where the final traces of dust and sweat were wiped from his skin. The small clay hearth crackled softly, the last embers of the day's cooking casting flickering shadows across the walls. He cleaned the clay bowls and simple utensils used to prepare the evening meal, arranging them carefully for the next day. Even these minor tasks carried significance. Order and attention ensured efficiency and stability in a life governed by rhythm, labor, and the cycles of nature. The peasant allowed himself a moment to rest on the mat in the corner of his home. The weight of the day pressed gently on his shoulders, muscles tight but eased by the knowledge of tasks completed and progress made. He observed the patterns of the village from his small doorway, faint figures moving between homes, smoke curling upward, and the reflection of moonlight on the river, silver and calm. Even in the quiet of evening, there was life, continuity, and the subtle energy of community. Each person, animal, and channel of water was part of a network sustaining existence, and he felt the deep satisfaction of contributing to this balance. As darkness approached, he performed a brief ritual of gratitude, a silent acknowledgement of the forces that governed their lives. The rivers that nourished the fields, the sun that warmed the land, and the soil that bore crops were all vital components of survival. His ancestors had long honored these elements, and in his own way, he continued the tradition. He allowed his mind to wander over the day's work, the plowed fields, the flowing canals, the attentive care of livestock, and the subtle cooperation of the village. Though repetitive to an outsider, these acts were imbued with purpose, each step maintaining the fragile equilibrium that defined life in Sumer. Finally, he prepared his sleeping mat, smoothing the straw and adjusting a small reed pillow. The day had been long, marked by labor, observation, and interaction with both the land and community. He lay down, feeling the comforting weight of fatigue, his body molded by the rhythm of labor, and his mind replayed the cycles of work, growth, and care that had filled the hours. Outside, the village settled into a hushed calm, the gentle rustling of reeds and the soft trickle of canal water accompanying the transition from wakefulness to rest. As he drifted toward sleep, the peasant's thoughts remained lightly tethered to the land. Each furrow, each plant, and each animal represented a connection that transcended the individual, a continuity of life, labor, and knowledge stretching back through generations. Though night had come, the work of survival, growth, and vigilance would continue tomorrow, repeating the rhythms of a life deeply intertwined with earth, water, and community. The quiet hum of the village, the soft whisper of wine through the fields, and the distant glimmer of the river accompanied him as he finally surrendered to sleep, completing one day in the enduring cycle of a Sumerian life. The first quiet hours of night had settled over the village, yet sleep came slowly to the peasant. The cool night air seeped through the gaps in the mud brick walls, brushing against his skin and carrying with it the faint, earthy scent of the river and the fields he had tended so diligently. Though his body ached from the day's labor, his mind remained alive with the rhythm of work, rehearsing the tasks of plowing, irrigating, and caring for animals, each movement etched into memory by repetition. Outside, the canal water shimmered under the moonlight, a silver ribbon winding across the fields, and he listened to the gentle, constant trickle as a soothing refrain, a reminder that life continued in quiet persistence. Even in the calm of night, his attention remained attuned to the smallest details. He could hear the low rustle of reeds in the distance, the occasional bleat of a goat or sheep settling into the pen, and the faint sounds of insects moving through the underbrush. Each noise, each movement, carried meaning. The balance of life in the village required vigilance, even if it was largely subconscious at this hour. He mentally reviewed the irrigation channels, recalling which furrows had received water first and which would need adjustment in the morning. This habitual assessment, ingrained over years, was as much a part of his rest as the laying down of his body upon the straw mat. Though darkness had enveloped the land, the peasant's senses remained alert. The air, cooler now, contrasted sharply with the heat of the day, and he felt the tension in his shoulders and legs gradually easing. He imagined the oxen resting in their pen, their rhythmic breathing a mirror of his own, and the barley fields swaying gently in the faint evening breeze, each plant nourished by water carefully guided from the canals. Even in sleep, the village and the land were intertwined with his consciousness. The continuity of their shared existence was a force that connected him to generations of ancestors who had walked the same fields, tended the same animals, and depended upon the same rivers. As he drifted toward deeper sleep, memories of the day's labor surfaced intermittently. The precise alignment of furrows, the delicate care of young shoots, and the subtle guidance of the oxen all mingled in a tapestry of effort and observation. Even small moments, the bending of a plant under the sun, the soft resistance of the soil under the plow, the gentle bleating of a young goat, held significance. Each instance was a reminder that life in Sumer was a continuous cycle of work, observation, and adaptation, a rhythm that persisted regardless of individual effort but depended upon it for survival. In the quiet of the night, he felt the presence of unseen forces that governed their world. The river, the soil, and the sun were constant collaborators in life, and his respect for their roles was as essential as any physical labor. Though tired, there was a meditative satisfaction in this awareness, a recognition that human effort and natural cycles were inseparable. The village, now hushed, reflected the culmination of collective work, the homes, the fields, the animals, and the canals, all evidence of a community bound by rhythm, diligence, and understanding. Finally, his breath slowed, and the ache in his body softened into restfulness. The mat beneath him pressed gently against his tired muscles, and the cool night air, carrying the mingled scents of earth and water, lulled him into a state of quiet repose. Dreams, if they came, were likely to be filled with the familiar sights and movements of the day, the furrows stretching across the fields, the animals' steady movements, and the soft flow of the river. In surrendering to sleep, the peasant continued the enduring cycle of observation, labor, and renewal that had defined not only this day but the countless days of those who had come before him and those who would follow. The night deepened, and the village lay in near total silence, save for the distant murmur of the river and the occasional low bleat of livestock in their pens. The peasant, though wrapped in the calm of sleep, remained subtly attuned to his surroundings. Years of life shaped by rhythm and labor had trained his senses to perceive even the slightest disturbances, shifts in air currents, distant animal movements, and the faint sounds of water running through the canals. Sleep was never total, it was a suspended vigilance, a rest that coexisted with awareness, ensuring both his safety and the continued well-being of the village. As the moon climbed higher, its pale light spilling across the fields, he stirred slightly, turning onto his side. In dreams, the day's labor replayed itself in abstract form, the plow slicing through rich soil, the oxen moving in silent harmony, the water flowing through channels to every furrow. The repetition of these motions in sleep mirrored their real-world necessity, reinforcing muscle memory and deepening his understanding of the subtle patterns of earth, water, and growth. Even in unconsciousness, the peasant remained a participant in the ongoing cycle that governed life in Sumer. The cool night air seeped through the cracks in the mud brick walls, brushing against the peasant's skin, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth, reeds, and river. These small sensory details, often overlooked in daylight labor, now held a quiet significance. He was reminded of the land's constant presence, the soil that bore crops, the water that sustained them, and the wind that carried both seed and dust across the plains. This awareness, even half-formed in dreams, was an extension of the day's efforts, a reflection of the intimate relationship he had cultivated with his environment over years of attentive labor. In the distance, other villagers slept under the same moon, their breathing slow and steady, their bodies recovering from a day of similar toil. The village functioned as a living organism, each person, each animal, and each field contributing to its rhythm. Though unseen, each act of diligence during daylight hours resonated through the night, the carefully plowed furrows, the protected seedlings, the steady flow of water through the canals. These were the foundations of survival, the tangible outcomes of coordinated labor and observation, and even in sleep, the peasant's mind acknowledged his role within this larger system. The moonlight highlighted the subtle movements of the fields. Leaves rustled softly in the breeze, water glimmered in narrow channels, and distant reeds bent in quiet patterns. He sensed the continuity of life, how the efforts of yesterday, today, and tomorrow were interconnected, forming a chain that transcended individual existence. The rhythm of the land, the animals, and the village persisted regardless of conscious attention, yet it was human labor that ensured the cycle remained intact. His dreams, filled with the textures and sounds of the day, reinforced this awareness, creating a seamless bridge between wakefulness and rest. Hours passed in the hushed serenity of night, the village cradled in the balance of toil and natural rhythm. The peasant lay still, muscles gradually relaxing as sleep deepened, yet even in this vulnerability, there was a sense of trust in the systems he had tended. The water flowed where it should, the animals were secure, and the fields rested beneath the moonlight, ready to continue their growth when the sun returned. In these quiet hours, the labor of life extended into an almost spiritual dimension, one of connection, continuity, and understanding, where the boundaries between human effort and natural cycles blurred into a seamless whole. By the time the first faint hints of dawn appeared, painting the eastern sky with soft hues of pink and gold, the peasant remained at rest, poised between the night's quiet reflection and the day to come. His body would soon awaken to labor again, guided by the same patterns, yet strengthened and informed by the restorative hours spent in vigilance and dreams. In this way, each day flowed into the next, a continuous rhythm of observation, care, and endurance, shaped by the land, the village, and the steady pulse of life in Sumer. With the first light of dawn creeping over the horizon, the peasant stirred from his sleep, muscles slowly loosening after hours of rest. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the subtle sense of wet earth, the river, and early morning dew settling on the barley fields. Even before fully waking, he sensed the familiar rhythm of the day ahead, the slow but constant tasks that defined his existence. Stretching and rising carefully from the straw mat, he allowed his eyes to adjust to the dim, soft light filtering through the small cracks in the mud brick walls. The village was beginning to awaken. From a distance, faint sounds of movement echoed through the streets and pathways, the soft shuffle of feet, the occasional low murmur, and the gentle bleating of livestock. Smoke from early hearth fires began to curl upward, bringing with it the smell of simple porridge and boiled grains. The peasant listened to these sounds, a practiced awareness settling over him. Each morning, though superficially similar to the last, carried small variations, subtle differences in animal behavior, soil moisture, or weather, all of which demanded his attention and response. He stepped outside into the soft glow of the early sun, feeling the cool mud beneath his bare feet. The barley and wheat swayed gently in the morning breeze, their green shoots glistening with dew. He inspected the irrigation channels first, ensuring that overnight flow had not caused any unintended diversions or blockages. Small adjustments to clay barriers were made with careful hands, guiding the water to reach every furrow precisely. The success of the day's labor, he knew, depended heavily on these early actions, setting the stage for planting, tending, or harvesting as required. Next, he turned to the livestock. The oxen had rested through the night, their powerful muscles relaxed but ready for the day's labor. The smaller goats and sheep stirred in their pens, stretching and bleating softly. The peasant moved among them, checking for injuries, ensuring access to water, and guiding them toward fresh grazing areas. Their calm acceptance of his presence reflected years of familiarity, a silent understanding forged between human and animal through countless repeated days of care and work. Each animal had its quirks, its predictable habits, and responding to these with patience ensured both efficiency and safety in the day's endeavors. After tending to the animals, he moved toward his personal plot, inspecting the young shoots of barley and wheat. The early morning light revealed subtle shifts in color, slight bends in stalks, and minute differences in soil moisture, details that required immediate attention to prevent long-term damage. He knelt, pressing the earth gently around the roots, removing a stray weed, and straightening a leaning shoot. Each action, though small, was critical to maintaining the delicate balance that determined survival. His hands, roughened by years of labor, moved with precision and care, reflecting the intimate knowledge he had of soil, plants, and the rhythms of growth. By mid-morning, the village was fully awake. Smoke rose from multiple hearths, children ran along narrow paths, and neighbors exchanged brief greetings as they carried out their own tasks. The peasant observed them from the edge of his plot, noting the quiet coordination that made their community function. Each person, animal, and furrow was a small component of a complex, interconnected system, and the smooth operation of the village depended on vigilance, skill, and cooperation. Though unseen by many, his labor today, as every day, played a critical role in sustaining this equilibrium. He paused for a moment, standing amid the green shoots glistening in the morning sun. The day stretched ahead, full of work, observation, and attention, yet in this quiet pause there was a sense of renewal. The previous day's efforts, combined with the clarity and energy brought by rest, provided both strength and guidance. Each furrow plowed, each canal adjusted, and each seed nurtured was part of a continuum, a chain of life maintained through cycles of labor, vigilance, and care that had endured for generations in this fertile land of Sumer. By mid-morning, the peasant was fully immersed in the rhythm of labor once more. The sun had risen higher, its warmth pressing steadily upon the flat plains, illuminating the straight furrows of barley and wheat stretching toward the horizon. Each row bore the imprint of careful hands and steady oxen, the result of yesterday's toil and the continuation of a cycle as old as the village itself. The peasant adjusted the plow for the firmer soil near the edges of his plot, guiding the oxen with subtle pressures of the yoke. Their movements were deliberate and synchronized, a quiet partnership forged over countless hours of shared work. The irrigation channels required constant vigilance. Water flowed steadily from the main canal, but small adjustments were needed to ensure that every furrow received an equal share. He inspected each barrier, pressed clay into cracks, and shifted reeds where necessary, mindful that even a minor oversight could result in wasted water or uneven growth. The steady, gentle flow of water reflected the combined effort of generations, a system perfected through careful observation, repeated repair, and unspoken understanding. The peasant worked with awareness, his hands knowing exactly where and how to intervene to maintain the delicate balance between soil, water, and crop. Occasionally, his gaze drifted to the surrounding village. Neighbors tended their own plots, women carried water or repaired baskets, and children ran along embankments or fetched tools. Though each performed individual tasks, their movements harmonized like the threads of a larger pattern, a silent orchestration of effort that sustained communal life. The peasant felt the weight of responsibility, not solely for his own family, but for the role his labor played in the survival of the entire village. The hum of activity, though quiet compared to the day's peak, carried reassurance, a confirmation that each person, animal, and plant contributed to the continuity of life. As the morning advanced, he inspected the young crops more closely. Some shoots leaned under the warmth of the sun, while others showed subtle signs of dryness. He knelt, pressing the soil gently around the roots and removing weeds that threatened to choke growth. Each gesture was precise, learned over years of observation and repeated action. He noticed the faint tracks of insects and the presence of small birds, understanding their roles in maintaining the ecosystem of the fields. Life, he knew, depended not only on his efforts but also on the unseen forces at work, pollinators, decomposers, and the flow of water through canals. Attention to these details was both practical and meditative, a reminder that every action in the field contributed to a complex, interdependent system. The oxen moved steadily, their large bodies glistening with sweat as they traced the furrows, guided by the peasant's careful hand. The repetitive rhythm of plowing, though exhausting, carried a meditative quality. Each step, each scrape of the plow, each adjustment to the soil was a conscious participation in the continuity of life. The peasant's focus was unwavering, the experience of decades of labor informing every decision. Even as fatigue began to press upon his shoulders and arms, there was a sense of satisfaction, an acknowledgement of the tangible results of skill, patience, and observation. By late morning, the village was fully alive with coordinated activity. Other men guided oxen across neighboring plots, women tended gardens and prepared small meals, and children ran errands or chased one another along narrow paths. The peasant observed these movements from his field, recognizing the silent interdependence that allowed the community to thrive. Each person's diligence, combined with the careful management of water, soil, and livestock, ensured that survival was maintained not only for today but for the seasons to come. The understanding of this continuity, woven into every task and every motion, provided both purpose and reassurance, grounding the peasant in the rhythm of a life deeply intertwined with the land and community. As the sun climbed higher toward noon, the peasant continued his labor with steady determination. The heat pressed down upon the flat plains, warming the soil and casting a golden glow across the barley and wheat. Each furrow he completed was a testament to the delicate balance of effort and observation, the culmination of years of experience guiding both animals and hands in precise harmony. The oxen, steady and strong, responded to his gentle prods, moving in time with the plow as he carved parallel lines into the earth. The rhythm was relentless but familiar, a natural extension of his body and mind working together with the land. Water management remained critical in the midday sun. The irrigation channels required careful oversight to ensure that every furrow received sufficient moisture without being flooded. The peasant walked along the canals, inspecting small clay barriers and reed-lined channels, adjusting their angles and sealing tiny cracks with mud. The flow of water was vital not only for the young crops but for the stability of the entire village, as mismanaged irrigation could lead to wasted water or compromised growth. Each careful adjustment was a lesson passed down from ancestors, a system perfected over generations through observation, trial, and meticulous care. In the distance, the village was alive with quiet activity. Women tended gardens, carried water, and mended tools, while children ran along narrow paths, delivering small bundles or simply chasing one another in bursts of energy. Men guided oxen through neighboring fields, adjusting their own furrows with practiced skill. Though each action was performed individually, a shared rhythm bound them all together, an unspoken coordination that allowed the community to function. The peasant, while focused on his own tasks, felt the collective pulse of labor, aware that his efforts contributed to a larger system of survival, growth, and communal stability. He paused briefly to observe the crops themselves. The barley shoots glistened with dew that had not yet evaporated, the wheat swayed gently in the breeze, and subtle signs of stress in certain patches demanded immediate attention. He knelt, pressing soil around the roots, removing a few encroaching weeds, and straightening bent stalks. Even the smallest gestures were significant. In this land, survival depended on constant care, attention to detail, and the delicate interplay of sun, soil, and water. Each action reinforced the peasant's connection to the land, a bond cultivated over a lifetime and strengthened by generations of observation and labor. The oxen paused briefly, their heavy breathing echoing in the stillness of the midday fields. The peasant adjusted the yoke, nudged them gently, and continued guiding them with a combination of patience and precision. The repetitive motion, though physically demanding, carried a meditative quality. Each scrape of the plow against the soil, each deliberate step, and each adjustment to furrows was part of a broader rhythm, a cycle that had persisted for centuries and would continue long after this day ended. The monotony of movement was deceptive, beneath it lay a complex orchestration of muscle memory, observation, and intuitive understanding of the land. By late morning, the peasant's mind was already anticipating the tasks that awaited after the midday heat peaked, tending to livestock, adjusting distant irrigation channels, and preparing for the eventual transition to evening. Yet even amidst the continuous labor, there was a sense of satisfaction in the visible results of his efforts, the straight furrows, the thriving crops, and the orderly flow of water across the fields. Each action, no matter how small, reinforced his role in sustaining the village, preserving continuity, and maintaining the delicate balance between human effort and natural cycles. As the sun reached its zenith, casting a bright, unrelenting light across the flat plains, the peasant slowed slightly, aware of the need to conserve energy during the hottest part of the day. The air shimmered above the fields, carrying the faint scent of warm earth and ripening crops. Sweat clung to his skin, his muscles ached, and yet he continued with steady determination, guided by years of experience and the ingrained understanding that the survival of both crops and community relied on his constant attention. He began by walking the edges of his plot, inspecting the young barley and wheat for any signs of stress or damage. The heat had caused some stalks to bend or wilt, and he pressed the soil gently around their roots, straightened leaning shoots, and removed small weeds that threatened to choke growth. Each movement was precise and deliberate, a careful balance of strength and subtlety, reflecting the intimate knowledge he had cultivated over years of tending this land. Even the smallest adjustment could have long-term effects, ensuring that the crop would thrive through the next days and weeks. The irrigation canals, too, demanded vigilance under the midday sun. Water, while abundant, had to be carefully distributed, and the peasant walked the narrow ditches, checking clay barriers and reed linings for signs of leaks or blockages. He adjusted a small partition here, pressed mud into a crack there, and observed the flow as it filled each furrow evenly. The system, perfected over generations, relied on meticulous attention and timing. Even minor miscalculations could result in wasted water or uneven crop growth. In these moments, the peasant felt both the weight of responsibility and the quiet satisfaction of mastery, knowing that his work ensured life and sustenance for his family and neighbors alike. Occasionally, he looked toward the village, where others were performing their own essential tasks. Women carried water, repaired baskets, or tended small gardens, while children ran errands or fetched tools. Men worked in neighboring fields, guiding their oxen and adjusting furrows with the same careful precision. Though each person acted independently, their movements were synchronized by necessity, forming a rhythm that sustained the village as a whole. The peasant recognized his role in this larger system, a vital link in a chain that connected generations past, present, and future. The oxen, powerful and patient, continued to move through the furrows, guided by his hands and voice. Their cooperation was crucial. Any misstep could disrupt the precision of the lines he had so carefully created. The repetitive motion of guiding the plow, adjusting soil, and directing water carried a meditative quality. Every action was both labor and meditation, a seamless combination of muscle, mind, and intuition honed through years of repetition. Even as the sun beat down, he found a rhythm that allowed him to work efficiently while maintaining the precision required for successful cultivation. By late morning, he allowed himself a brief pause, leaning on the plow to catch his breath and surveying the work he had completed. The furrows stretched straight and even, water flowed smoothly, and the young crop stood upright, strengthened by his attentive care. In this moment, he could see the tangible results of his efforts, the evidence of skill and diligence etched into the land itself. The village, the crops, the animals, all were interconnected, each depending on the other in a delicate balance that required constant vigilance, patience, and understanding. As the sun climbed higher, signaling the peak of the day's heat, the peasant prepared mentally for the continuation of labor, knowing that the afternoon would bring more tasks, tending to distant fields, adjusting communal canals, and ensuring the well-being of livestock. Though the day was long and physically demanding, he embraced the rhythm of his life, the interplay of labor and observation, and the quiet satisfaction that came from sustaining not just his own family but the entire community. As the afternoon approached, the heat softened slightly, though the sun remained bright and unrelenting over the fields. The peasant shifted his focus to the more distant portions of the communal lands, where irrigation required careful monitoring and minor adjustments. He walked along narrow embankments, stepping carefully to avoid slipping into the shallow canals, his eyes scanning the water's flow for subtle deviations. Even a small misalignment could result in water pooling in one area while leaving another parched. His hands, calloused from years of labor, moved with precision, guiding small barriers, pressing mud into cracks, and arranging reeds to direct the flow evenly across the furrows. The oxen, having rested briefly during a short pause, resumed their steady work. Their cooperation was essential. They moved as a single unit, responding to subtle cues from the peasant's hands and voice. The repetitive rhythm of the plow cutting through the soil was almost hypnotic, each scrape and furrow reinforcing the careful balance between effort and result. Though physically demanding, the work carried a meditative quality, the combination of muscle memory, attentive observation, and intuitive understanding of the land creating a seamless flow of labor. Around him, the village seemed to breathe in quiet unison with the land. Women carried water or gathered firewood, children ran errands or played along the canal edges, and men worked in other fields, guiding oxen and adjusting furrows. Though each individual acted independently, their movements formed an intricate, unspoken coordination. The peasant felt a deep connection to this rhythm, aware that his labor was part of a larger system that sustained the life of the community. Every adjustment he made to the soil or water contributed to a network of interdependent efforts, a delicate harmony that had evolved over generations. He paused to examine a small patch of barley showing signs of stress from the midday sun. Kneeling carefully, he pressed the soil around the roots, straightened bent shoots, and removed weeds that threatened to choke growth. Even minor gestures had significance. In this land, survival depended on constant attention to detail and the interplay of human labor with the natural cycles of sun, soil, and water. The peasant moved deliberately, each motion informed by observation and experience, his mind fully immersed in the task despite the fatigue building in his arms and back. The irrigation canals required further inspection. He adjusted a small clay partition here, pressed mud into a crack there, and ensured that water flowed evenly to the farthest furrows. This careful management of water, a resource more precious than gold in some respects, reflected centuries of accumulated knowledge passed down through generations. The peasant understood the importance of every small intervention. One miscalculation could disrupt the delicate balance that sustained crops, animals, and ultimately the entire village. The oxen labored steadily, their breathing heavy in the warm air, while the peasant guided them with quiet precision. Each furrow carved into the soil was a testament to the seamless integration of human effort and natural rhythm. Even as fatigue pressed upon him, there was satisfaction in the visible results of his labor, the straight lines of tilled earth, the young crop standing firm, and the water flowing exactly where it was needed. This tangible proof of work reinforced both skill and purpose, a constant reminder that life in Sumer depended on attentiveness, patience, and diligence. As the afternoon wore on, he allowed himself brief pauses to survey the land. From small rises, he could see the expanse of the village fields, canals glimmering with sunlight, and the distant river reflecting the sky. The interconnectedness of all elements, the crops, the water, the livestock, and the people, was evident. Each person's labor, though individual, contributed to the collective survival and prosperity of the village. The peasant, grounded in his tasks yet aware of the larger system, felt both responsibility and quiet pride. Each day was a continuation of a rhythm as old as the land itself, a cycle of effort, observation, and renewal that defined life in Mesopotamia. As the afternoon progressed, the sun began its gradual descent, casting long, slanting shadows across the fields. The heat, though still present, softened into a warmer, golden glow that bathed the barley and wheat in light. The peasant continued his work in the distant portions of the communal fields, guiding the oxen with steady hands and careful attention. Each furrow carved into the earth was deliberate, a precise intervention in the ongoing rhythm of growth, ensuring that water, soil, and seed harmonized to produce life. Water management remained a central task. The irrigation canals, channels of life that crisscrossed the plains, required constant vigilance. He inspected each one meticulously, checking the clay barriers and the placement of reeds that guided the flow. A small misalignment could result in flooded furrows or parched soil, compromising not just his crops but those of his neighbors as well. With practiced movements, he pressed mud into cracks, shifted reeds, and directed water along precisely measured paths. The subtle art of irrigation was an inherited skill, refined over generations, and it demanded patience, skill, and unwavering focus. The oxen moved in harmony with the plow, their muscles flexing under the strain as they followed the peasant's gentle guidance. Their trust in him, built through countless days of shared labor, allowed for smooth, coordinated movements. Each step, each scrape of the plow, was part of a larger rhythm that blended human effort with the natural cycles of soil, water, and sunlight. Though exhausting, the work carried a meditative quality, a repetition that grounded the peasant in the present while connecting him to generations of ancestors who had walked the same fields and relied upon the same systems of cultivation. Around the village, life continued in quiet, steady motions. Women tended to small gardens near homes, fetching water or preparing simple meals for their families. Children ran along narrow paths, carrying small bundles or chasing one another in bursts of energy. Men worked on other plots, guiding oxen or adjusting furrows, their movements synchronized with necessity and habit. From the edge of his field, the peasant observed the village as a cohesive organism, each person, animal, and crop functioning as part of an interconnected whole. His labor was a single, vital link in this chain, sustaining not only his own household but contributing to the well-being of the community. He paused briefly to examine a patch of barley that appeared stressed by the midday heat. Kneeling, he pressed soil around the roots, straightened leaning shoots, and removed encroaching weeds. Each small action carried significance, a reflection of the careful attention required to maintain balance in the natural world. Even subtle signs, a bent stalk, a small patch of dry earth, a diverted stream of water, could have lasting consequences if left unchecked. His hands, calloused and steady, moved with confidence, shaped by years of observation and experience. By late afternoon, the fields had been fully tended, yet the peasant knew his work was far from complete. Livestock required attention, canals needed final checks, and his own plot demanded small adjustments before evening. The repetition of labor, while physically taxing, was infused with purpose. Each furrow, each adjustment to water flow, each gesture of care was a thread in the intricate fabric of survival, linking human effort with the cycles of the earth. As the sun dipped lower, reflecting golden light across the canals and fields, he allowed a moment of quiet reflection. From this vantage point, the interconnectedness of the village and the land was evident: flowing water, ripening crops, resting animals, and the steady movement of people all contributed to a living, breathing system. The peasant felt a sense of pride and continuity, knowing that his work, though physically demanding and often unseen, was essential to the harmony and survival of his world. As the late afternoon sun began its slow descent, the peasant shifted focus from the distant fields to his livestock. The oxen, having worked steadily through the day, were guided back toward their pen near the edge of his plot. Their massive bodies moved deliberately, muscles rippling under his careful direction. The peasant ensured their path was clear of stones, uneven ground, or stray debris, for even a small stumble could disrupt the rhythm of the animals or injure them. The quiet coordination between human and oxen, built over years of shared labor, required both patience and subtle communication, an almost wordless understanding of strength and trust. Once the oxen were safely secured, he turned his attention to the goats and sheep, which had grazed in the pastures along the canal. Their movement was lighter and less predictable than the oxen, requiring a gentler, more attentive guidance. The peasant nudged and steered them with careful hands, using subtle gestures and low murmurs to direct them toward their pens. The animals responded with a quiet obedience, a reflection of the bond forged through routine care and vigilance. Each one was checked briefly for signs of injury or fatigue, small yet essential precautions to ensure their survival and productivity. With all animals settled, the peasant inspected the enclosures. He reinforced gates and walls with mud where needed and ensured that water and fodder were accessible for the night. Even minor oversight could create problems by morning, so he moved deliberately, checking every detail. The soft bleating of young goats and the low, steady breathing of oxen created a calming atmosphere, signaling the transition from the labor of the day to the relative calm of evening. This shift in rhythm allowed the peasant to momentarily step back and observe the results of his day's work. The village itself had begun to quiet. Smoke rose from hearth fires, carrying the aroma of simple meals, boiled grains, small roasted vegetables, and occasionally dried fish. The low murmur of voices indicated families preparing for evening, while children ran along narrow paths before returning home. From his plot, the peasant could see neighbors finishing tasks, tending to small gardens, and making minor repairs to tools or homes. The interconnectedness of labor and community was evident. Each action, though seemingly independent, contributed to the stability and survival of the village as a whole. The peasant then walked through his small garden near the dwelling, checking the young shoots and ensuring that the soil remained properly moist. He pressed gently around roots, straightened leaning stalks, and removed weeds that had taken hold. Even as daylight waned, attention to these small details remained essential. The delicate balance between growth and neglect required constant vigilance, for a single overlooked patch could disrupt the yield for weeks to come. In these moments, his work became both practical and contemplative, a meditation on responsibility, continuity, and care. By evening, the sun's golden glow reflected across the irrigation canals, highlighting the precise flow of water that nourished the fields. The peasant allowed himself a brief pause, surveying the results of the day. Furrows ran straight and even, water reached every corner of the plots, and the animals rested quietly in their pens. A sense of quiet satisfaction settled over him, tempered by the knowledge that tomorrow would bring another day of labor, observation, and care. The rhythms of Sumerian life were relentless, but in their constancy lay both purpose and a profound connection to the land and community that had endured for generations. As the sun dipped lower toward the horizon, the peasant moved through his fields one final time, ensuring that every detail of the day's labor had been completed. The barley and wheat, warmed by the sun and nourished by the carefully guided water, stood upright, their green stalks swaying gently in the evening breeze. He checked the furrows one last time, observing the subtle flow of water, the even spacing of plants, and the absence of disturbances from small animals or wind. Each furrow, each adjustment, was evidence of a day meticulously structured by attention, knowledge, and routine. The livestock rested quietly in their pens. The oxen, having performed the day's hardest labor, were calm and steady, their breathing slow and even. The goats and sheep nuzzled the earth or settled together for warmth, occasionally shifting or bleating softly. The peasant moved among them, touching their coats, ensuring that all were healthy and uninjured, and scattering a small portion of fodder to sustain them overnight. This nightly routine, though repetitive, reinforced the bond between caretaker and animals, a relationship built on trust, consistency, and the shared rhythm of life. Turning toward the small garden by his dwelling, the peasant checked the young crops again, lightly pressing soil around roots, straightening bent shoots, and removing any remaining weeds. The garden, though modest, was a critical source of sustenance and nourishment, and its careful maintenance was as important as the expansive fields he had tended throughout the day. Every action, no matter how small, contributed to the balance between labor and reward, survival and growth. In the distance, the village was quieting as families gathered around hearths. Smoke rose in thin spirals, carrying the sense of simple meals across the warm air. Children's laughter had faded, replaced by the soft murmur of voices preparing for the evening. The peasant observed these movements from his small rise, recognizing the collective rhythm that sustained the community. Each person's efforts, combined with careful management of crops, water, and livestock, created a network of interdependence that allowed life to continue, day after day. He paused for a moment, leaning on the plow that had guided him through the morning and afternoon. The straight, even lines of furrows were a testament to his skill and persistence, while the flowing water reflected the careful attention that had prevented waste or damage. The peasant felt the satisfaction of work completed, a quiet pride in the tangible results of his efforts. Though physically weary, his mind remained aware of the intricate balance maintained through constant labor, observation, and adaptation. As twilight settled over the village, the colors of the sky shifted to warm oranges and deep purples, and the soft shadows of the fields lengthened. The peasant walked back toward his dwelling, passing the canals that reflected the fading light, the animals settled in their pens, and the orderly furrows stretching across the land. Each step reinforced his connection to the land, the crops, the animals, and the people, a continuous thread woven through generations. In this moment, the rhythm of life, the balance of labor, vigilance, and care, felt complete for the day, yet poised to continue as the cycle of sunrise and sunset inevitably returned. Finally, near the doorway of his home, he allowed himself to pause, inhaling the scent of earth, water, and the fading warmth of the sun. He had completed the day's work with diligence and attentiveness, ensuring the survival and stability of both family and community. As the first stars appeared in the deepening sky, he felt a quiet sense of satisfaction and continuity, a knowledge that tomorrow would demand the same care and effort, and that he, like those who came before him, was an essential part of the enduring rhythm of life in Sumer. As twilight deepened, the peasant moved inside his small dwelling, the walls warmed by the fading sun and the residual heat of the clay hearth. The day's labor weighed on his body, but there was a sense of calm that came with evening, the rhythm of toil slowing, replaced by the quiet attentiveness of completion. He checked the simple furnishings, straightened mats and tools, and ensured that the small hearth was ready for the evening meal. The preparation, though modest, was essential. Order and care reflected a deeper connection to the life he maintained and the family he supported. The air inside the home was cooler than outside, carrying the earthy scent of straw, clay, and stored grain. The peasant moved slowly, rubbing his hands over the walls and shelves, inspecting containers of dried grains and pulses. Each held sustenance and represented the continuity of life, the careful planning and effort that ensured survival in a world shaped by sun, water, and soil. Even the simplest tasks, arranging tools, checking food stores, required attention, for neglect could ripple through the day ahead, creating complications that could undermine hard-won stability. He approached the small hearth, stirring the last embers from earlier cooking, and ensured that a modest meal was ready for his family. Boiled grains, perhaps mixed with a few vegetables or dried herbs, were arranged in simple bowls, while water cooled near the side of the hearth. There were no lavish flavors, no spices beyond what the earth provided naturally, yet each meal carried significance. Eating was not simply about nourishment, it was a ritual of renewal, a pause in the day's labor that allowed both body and mind to regain energy and reflect upon the cycles that governed life. Outside, the village began to quiet even further. The last traces of movement, the occasional child returning from an errand, a distant bleat from a goat, or the soft splash of water in a canal, were gradually replaced by silence. The peasant listened for these sounds as he moved about the dwelling, aware that even at rest, the rhythms of life persisted. Water continued to flow, animals settled, and the earth cooled beneath the deepening sky. He understood that vigilance did not end with darkness, minor adjustments and attention to detail carried over into the night, maintaining the delicate balance that allowed survival. After ensuring that provisions were in place, he moved toward his sleeping mat, smoothing the straw and adjusting a small reed pillow. The day's exhaustion pressed upon him, yet the mind remained partially alert, reviewing the tasks completed and anticipating those that would come with the dawn. The furrows plowed, the irrigation channels adjusted, and the livestock cared for, all were evidence of work done well and attention paid to the interdependent system of the village. Even as he lay down, he felt the lingering pulse of the day's labor, a quiet satisfaction in knowing that his efforts had sustained life for both his family and the community. The sky darkened to deep indigo, stars beginning to glimmer above the plains. The soft rustle of reeds along the canal and the gentle trickle of water provided a soothing background, lulling his body toward rest. The peasant reflected briefly on the continuity of life, the sun that had warmed the fields, the river that had nourished them, the animals that had assisted in labor, and the people whose collective work ensured survival. In this quiet reflection, he found both humility and pride, an awareness that his role, though modest, was essential in maintaining the cycles of life in Sumer. Finally, the peasant allowed his body to relax fully, surrendering to the restorative calm of night. Muscles loosened, the mind eased from constant vigilance, and a gentle fatigue brought the first threads of sleep. Outside, the village lay in hushed repose, canals shimmering faintly in starlight, and the quiet harmony of human effort and natural cycles persisted. He drifted toward rest, the day complete, yet already part of a cycle that would renew with the rising sun. Night deepened over the village, and the peasant lay on his straw mat, partially enveloped in the cool shadow of his home. Though fatigue weighed heavily on his limbs, the mind remained alive with the rhythm of the day, reviewing each action, each adjustment to furrows and canals, each moment spent guiding the oxen. Sleep did not come all at once, it arrived in stages, a gradual descent into restfulness while the senses maintained a quiet awareness of the surrounding world. The faint sound of water trickling through nearby canals, the soft breathing of resting animals, and the occasional rustle of reeds reminded him that life continued beyond his immediate attention. Even in this calm, the peasant's thoughts moved through the details of the day. The precise alignment of furrows, the careful flow of water, the maintenance of the oxen yoke, all were mentally replayed. These were not mere memories but rehearsals, a way to reinforce techniques, anticipate possible adjustments for the next day, and maintain an internal record of the land's needs. The rhythm of these reflections mirrored the continuity of life itself, where labor, observation, and adaptation intertwined in an unbroken cycle. He could feel the subtle chill of night seeping through the mud brick walls, brushing his skin and carrying the earthy scent of the river and fields. Each inhalation brought awareness of the environment, the soil that had been tilled, the water that nourished the crops, and the animals that rested quietly in their pens. Even the smallest sensory input carried meaning, it was a reminder that human life in Sumer was inseparable from the natural cycles surrounding it. Awareness and rest coexisted, a delicate balance that ensured both survival and understanding. The distant moonlight reflected off the canal waters, creating patterns that shifted as ripples passed. The peasant's mind traced the paths of water, imagining the flow through each furrow and across every plot. Though his body rested, this mental observation reinforced the practical skills of the day, keeping knowledge of the land active and ready for use with the return of sunlight. Even the quietest night contained lessons, subtle reminders of the intricate relationship between human effort and natural forces, between life and the land that sustained it. Around the village, other households experienced similar rhythms. Children slept, wrapped in straw mats or simple cloths, while parents completed minor tasks before surrendering fully to rest. Smoke from the last fires drifted upward, carrying the faint aroma of evening meals and drying grain. The peasant, while physically apart from these routines, felt the shared pulse of the village, the collective rhythm of care, vigilance, and restoration that defined their existence. Each household, each plot, and each individual was a component in a living system that demanded attention, respect, and balance. Gradually, sleep deepened. The peasant's breathing slowed, muscles relaxed, and the lingering tension from the day's labor eased. Dreams began to form, often echoing the movements of the day, the oxen plowing furrows, water flowing through canals, and crops standing upright in precise rows. In this state, labor and reflection intertwined, blending effort and observation, work and understanding. Even unconscious, he remained connected to the life of the village and the patterns of the land, a quiet participant in the cycles of survival and growth. By the middle of the night, the village lay in hushed repose. The canal waters shimmered faintly under the moon, and the air carried the cool, damp scent of earth and vegetation. The peasant, fully embraced by sleep, rested in alignment with the enduring rhythms of Sumer, aware, yet unburdened, part of a living cycle that had persisted for generations and would continue beyond the day to come. The night wore on, and the village lay under a deep, velvety sky, stars scattered like tiny sparks above the flat plains. The peasant slept, yet even in slumber, the rhythms of his day seemed to persist in subtle ways. His body rested, muscles releasing the tension built from hours of labor, while his mind wandered through images of furrows, flowing canals, and the gentle guidance of oxen. Dreams unfolded as vivid rehearsals of tasks performed, reinforcing skill, observation, and the quiet understanding that had grown over years of daily toil. Occasionally, a soft sound would stir him slightly, a distant bleat from a goat, the movement of water through a canal, or the whisper of reeds in the night breeze. These sounds did not fully awaken him, yet they threaded into his awareness, a reminder of the village's ongoing life. Sleep in this world was never total, it was a suspended vigilance, an intertwining of rest and attentiveness. The peasant had learned over decades to balance the two, trusting the systems he maintained while remaining subtly alert to changes that might demand attention. His dreams traced the day's actions in detail, walking along irrigation channels, adjusting small barriers, guiding oxen across furrows, checking soil around young crops, and observing the subtle changes in light, moisture, and plant growth. These nocturnal rehearsals were not mere repetition, they were an extension of knowledge, a quiet reinforcement of the skills needed to ensure survival. Even while unconscious, his mind maintained a link to the land and its cycles, integrating experience, observation, and intuition into an ongoing pattern of awareness. Outside, the moonlight reflected off calm water, highlighting the gentle curves of the irrigation channels. The peasants' animals lay quietly in their pens, resting but ready for the next day's work. The village as a whole shared this moment of pause, each household engaged in its own rhythms of recovery and preparation. The interconnectedness of labor, vigilance, and rest was evident even in stillness, the flowing water, the sleeping livestock, the quiet paths, and the stars above all participating in a system sustained by both human effort and the natural cycles of the land. Even in dreams, he revisited small details that might have been overlooked, a slight shift in the oxen yoke, a patch of soil needing more attention, the angle of a tiny clay partition in the canal. These minute considerations reinforced a lifetime of accumulated experience, the understanding that survival relied upon precision, observation, and foresight. Each action, each adjustment, no matter how small, contributed to a living system that extended beyond his immediate consciousness, linking past and future, labor and sustenance, human effort and natural forces. The cool night air brushed through the village, carrying the scent of earth, river, and growing crops. Even in sleep, the peasant was attuned to these signals, a continuation of the quiet mindfulness that defined his daily life. Dreams and reality intertwined, creating a seamless flow where rest supported skill, reflection reinforced knowledge, and awareness persisted beyond the boundaries of wakefulness. This balance, cultivated over years of consistent labor, allowed him to maintain both his body and the systems upon which the village depended. As the hours passed, the depth of night seemed endless yet purposeful. The peasant's restfulness deepened while maintaining subtle attentiveness, a natural equilibrium that ensured readiness for the next day's labor. The village, the fields, the canals, and the animals existed within this suspended harmony, all bound by the rhythm of life that the peasant both contributed to and depended upon. In these quiet hours, the continuity of human effort and natural cycles was clear, a living testament to the enduring patterns of Sumerian life. As the first faint hints of dawn began to touch the horizon, the village remained cloaked in a deep, quiet darkness. The peasant slept still, yet his body stirred subtly, muscles flexing as if anticipating the return of light. Even in the pre-dawn stillness, the cycles of life continued, water flowed through the irrigation canals, animals shifted in their pens, and the earth itself cooled after a long day of sunlight. Sleep was not total surrender, it was a delicate balance between rest and quiet awareness, a continuation of vigilance in harmony with the natural rhythms of Sumer. Dreams of the previous day mingled with faint anticipations of the day to come. The peasant moved in his mind through fields of barley and wheat, guiding oxen across straight furrows, checking soil around young crops, and adjusting minor details in the irrigation channels. These nocturnal rehearsals were subtle but vital, they reinforced skill, memory, and the intuitive understanding of the land that had been cultivated over years of daily labor. Even unconscious, his mind worked alongside his body, preparing him for the cycle that would soon begin again. Outside, the air was cool, carrying the earthy scent of damp soil and flowing water. The soft rustle of reeds along the canal, combined with distant murmurs of the village beginning to stir, created a quiet backdrop. Livestock shifted, low bleats and snuffles occasionally breaking the silence, reminding the peasant's subconscious mind that life persisted uninterrupted through the night. This gentle awakening of sounds and movements was both comforting and instructive, signaling that the interconnected systems of water, crops, animals, and people were functioning as they should. As the first hints of sunlight crept over the horizon, the peasant's eyes opened slowly. Muscles ached gently from the previous day's labor, yet there was a familiar energy in the stretch of his limbs. The soft golden light illuminated the furrows, the flowing water, and the green shoots of barley and wheat, each detail reflecting the labor and care of the day before. He observed the fields with a practiced eye, noting subtle shifts in soil, water, and plants, mentally cataloging what would require attention in the morning. The rhythm of labor, observation, and care was about to resume, as it had for countless generations before him. He moved to the small garden near his dwelling, checking the young plants and pressing soil gently around their roots. The precision required even in these early hours was essential. Small miscalculations could lead to problems later in the day. His hands, roughened by years of toil, moved with deliberate care, straightening leaning shoots, removing weeds, and ensuring that each plant had access to sunlight and water. Even as the village slowly awakened around him, his focus remained on the immediate tasks, reinforcing the delicate balance between effort, observation, and survival. The oxen were ready, having rested fully through the night. The peasant guided them toward the fields, yoking them with careful hands and checking that all connections were secure. Their steady, patient movements reflected a deep understanding and trust, the result of countless hours of shared work. Each step of the plow, each adjustment to the soil or water, was part of a greater rhythm, a seamless interplay between human effort and natural cycles. As the sun rose fully above the horizon, the village stirred with life, neighbors tending fields, women preparing water and food, children beginning their daily errands, all participating in the shared labor that sustained the community. With the day beginning once more, the peasant felt the continuity of life pressing gently upon him. Each action, from plowing to watering to tending animals, was both an immediate necessity and part of a larger pattern that had persisted through generations. In this early light, he embraced the rhythm, understanding that the cycles of labor, rest, and observation were eternal, linking past, present, and future in the enduring life of Sumer. The early morning light spread steadily across the plains, casting long shadows from the small dwellings and the canals that crisscrossed the village. The peasant, now fully awake, began the day's labor with quiet determination. His first task was to inspect the furrows in the fields, ensuring that overnight shifts in water flow had not disrupted the irrigation. Moisture glistened in the soil, reflecting the new sunlight, and young shoots of barley and wheat stood upright, nourished and ready for continued growth. The careful balance between water, soil, and plant required constant attention, and even these early hours demanded focus. He moved along the edges of his plot, adjusting minor channels, pressing soil around roots, and removing small weeds that had begun to grow in the cooler hours of dawn. Each movement was deliberate, reflecting years of experience and an instinctive understanding of the land. The peasant's hands, roughened from decades of labor, moved with precision, reinforcing the careful patterns that allowed crops to thrive. The rhythm of these early tasks was both meditative and practical, preparing the fields for the extended labor that would follow with the rising sun. The oxen, fully rested and eager for work, were guided to the main field. Their steady, synchronized movements mirrored the peasant's careful commands, and together they carved straight furrows into the soft earth. Each furrow represented both immediate progress and an investment in the continuity of life, a thread in the fabric of survival that stretched from one generation to the next. The repetitive motion of plowing, though physically demanding, carried a meditative quality, a rhythm that had been refined over countless days of toil and observation. Nearby, the village began to stir with activity. Women carried water to small gardens, tending young plants or preparing simple morning meals. Children ran errands, delivering small bundles of firewood or grain, their laughter mingling with the sounds of flowing water and the gentle movement of animals. Other men guided oxen across neighboring plots, adjusting furrows and checking irrigation channels with practiced eyes. Though each acted independently, the combined effort created a silent harmony, an unspoken coordination that sustained the village as a whole. The peasant felt his own labor as part of this larger system, understanding that the survival of his family and community relied on careful attention and continuous effort. As the sun climbed higher, he checked on the smaller details, the young garden near his home, the alignment of minor channels, and the well-being of the livestock. The goats and sheep had already begun grazing along the embankments, and he ensured their access to water and shelter. Each task, no matter how modest, reinforced the delicate balance between human labor and natural cycles, a constant interplay that defined life in Sumer. Even brief oversight could disrupt the system, so attentiveness remained a constant necessity. By mid-morning, the peasant paused briefly to survey the fields. The straight furrows, flowing water, and healthy crops reflected the labor of both his hands and those of his neighbors. The village, viewed from his plot, appeared as a harmonious system, animals, people, and land all engaged in interconnected rhythms of survival. This observation, though quiet, reinforced purpose and pride, a reassurance that the effort invested in the land and its care was both meaningful and essential. Each day, though repetitive in its tasks, offered tangible results, a visible testament to skill, observation, and the enduring cycle of life. By late morning, the sun had climbed high, warming the fields and casting sharp shadows across the flat plains. The peasant, immersed in his labor, guided the oxen steadily through the furrows, their heavy hooves pressing the soil and creating straight, even lines. The repetitive motion of plowing demanded strength, endurance, and careful attention. Each furrow, perfectly aligned, was a testament to the skill developed over years of labor, a combination of physical effort and intimate knowledge of the land. The oxen moved patiently, responding to subtle cues from the peasant's hands and voice, their cooperation vital for the success of the day's work. He paused briefly to inspect the crops, walking slowly along the furrows. The young barley and wheat, nourished by water and sunlight, swayed gently in the morning breeze. Some shoots had leaned or bent, and he pressed soil around their roots, straightened their stalks, and removed encroaching weeds. Every small action mattered, even minor neglect could affect growth and yield. The careful observation of subtle signs, soil moisture, leaf color, or bent stalks, was essential, a skill refined over a lifetime of daily engagement with the land. Irrigation demanded constant vigilance. The canals, though engineered and maintained by generations, required small adjustments to ensure even distribution. The peasant moved along their edges, inspecting clay barriers, pressing mud into cracks, and adjusting the flow where needed. Water, the lifeblood of the fields, needed guidance and attention, for a misaligned channel could flood one area while leaving another dry. The work was repetitive yet precise, a continuous negotiation between human effort and natural forces, and it required patience, care, and foresight. The village stirred faintly in the distance. Women carried water, prepared meals, or tended small garden plots, while children ran errands or helped with minor tasks. Other men guided oxen and tended neighboring fields, adjusting furrows and managing irrigation. Though each individual worked independently, their efforts formed an interconnected system, a shared rhythm that allowed survival and continuity. The peasant felt this collective energy, a silent pulse that connected every household and every plot of land into a single living organism. As the day advanced, he shifted to more detailed tasks. Checking minor garden plots near his dwelling, he ensured that soil around young plants remained moist and weeds were removed. He observed the direction of sunlight and how shadows fell, ensuring that small adjustments could maximize growth. The goats and sheep grazed nearby, and he moved among them to ensure access to water and shelter, guiding stragglers back to the pen if needed. Every action, no matter how small, was integral to the cycle of life, linking effort with survival and growth. By mid-afternoon, sweat dripped from his brow, yet the rhythm of labor continued. The furrows were straight and even, the canals flowing smoothly, and the young crops stood upright. The peasant paused to survey his work, noting the visible results of his efforts and the harmony between human intervention and natural cycles. The village, from this vantage point, appeared as a living network, animals, people, crops, and water all functioning in delicate balance. Each day was a testament to continuity, a demonstration that survival depended on attentiveness, persistence, and connection to the land. As the sun reached its peak, casting a golden haze over the fields, the peasant allowed himself a brief pause. He leaned on the plow, wiping sweat from his brow, and took a moment to observe the land he had tended so diligently. The barley and wheat stretched in neat rows, nourished by carefully guided water and meticulous attention. The long hours of labor were reflected in the precision of the furrows, the evenness of irrigation, and the upright, healthy shoots. This pause was not just physical, it was an opportunity to mentally survey the delicate balance he maintained between soil, water, plants, and livestock. Even in this quiet moment, the responsibilities of the day pressed lightly on his mind. Irrigation channels needed ongoing observation, minor repairs to fencing and enclosures could not be ignored, and the livestock required consistent care. He traced the flow of water with his eyes, imagining adjustments that might be necessary later, and noted small variations in soil color that hinted at moisture levels or potential weaknesses. Experience had taught him to anticipate needs before they became urgent, an intuitive understanding of the cycles that governed his life and the lives of those around him. The oxen shifted slightly, sensing the pause, and the peasant guided them toward a shaded area near a small grove of reeds. Their steady breathing and patient compliance reflected the trust built over countless shared days, each movement a subtle conversation between man and animal. Nearby, goats and sheep grazed quietly, occasionally lifting their heads to watch him. Ensuring their access to water and shade was a constant consideration, particularly under the intensity of the midday sun. Every adjustment, however minor, contributed to the seamless functioning of the village's interconnected system. Around the village, life continued its rhythm. Women tended small garden plots, preparing simple meals, carrying water, and checking on children. Men guided oxen or adjusted canals, attending to distant plots. Even in the midday lull, there was a shared energy, a sense of collective vigilance that kept the community alive and thriving. The peasant felt himself part of this network, each action he took intertwined with those of neighbors, family, and animals. Survival in Sumer was never solitary, it was the sum of countless small attentions, synchronized into a larger rhythm that encompassed both human effort and natural forces. He returned to the furrows, checking the straightness of the plow lines and the flow of water in the smaller channels. The subtle undulations of the soil required minor adjustments, and he pressed mud into cracks, shifted reeds, and guided water along the intended paths. Each gesture, though repetitive, carried weight, ensuring that crops would receive nourishment evenly and that the balance of life maintained across the village fields. The meditative quality of these actions allowed him to focus even as the sun reached its zenith, blending labor with quiet contemplation. By early afternoon, the heat pressed heavily upon the plains. Sweat clung to his body, yet the peasant persisted, guided by the ingrained rhythm of work and the knowledge that each effort directly contributed to the well-being of his family and community. He checked the small garden near his dwelling, adjusted shading for tender shoots, and ensured that young animals were safely out of the sun. Each moment was an interplay of observation, action, and anticipation, a seamless combination of experience and instinct honed over years of labor. As he paused once more to rest briefly, the land lay before him in careful order. Irrigation flowed, crops grew, and animals rested. The day, though long and demanding, had yielded tangible results, a balance maintained, sustenance secured, and the continuity of life ensured. In the rhythm of labor, observation, and care, the peasant found a quiet satisfaction, an enduring sense of purpose rooted in the cycles of the earth and the shared life of his village. The afternoon sun bore down on the fields, casting long, warm shadows and highlighting the green shoots of barley and wheat. The peasant, his body weary but steady, continued his work, moving along the furrows with a practiced eye. Each step was deliberate, each motion informed by years of experience. He guided the oxen with subtle shifts of his hands and careful nudges, ensuring that the plow cut straight lines and that soil was properly aerated. This repetitive labor, though exhausting, carried a rhythm that connected him deeply to the land, the animals, and the enduring cycles of life. Irrigation required particular attention in the afternoon heat. The flow of water through the canals shifted slightly under the sun's intensity, and small adjustments were necessary to maintain an even distribution. The peasant pressed mud into cracks, repositioned reeds, and ensured that every furrow received its share. Water was life in Sumer, and the careful management of this precious resource demanded constant vigilance. Even minor oversights could lead to uneven growth, stunted crops, or wasted effort, making precision as essential as strength or endurance. Nearby, goats and sheep grazed in the cooler shade of small trees and reeds lining the canal. The peasant guided them occasionally, ensuring access to water and that no animal wandered too far from the pen. Their quiet movements, paired with the steady breathing of the oxen, created a rhythm that seemed to pulse with the land itself. The connection between man, animal, and soil was seamless, each relied upon the other, a network of interdependence that defined daily life. The village, observed from the fields, moved with its own rhythm. Women carried water and prepared simple meals, checking on young children or tending garden plots. Men worked on distant fields, guiding oxen or adjusting irrigation channels. The peasant, while focused on his own labor, felt the collective pulse of the community, a silent understanding that the work of one contributed to the well-being of all. Survival depended on coordination, attentiveness, and a shared understanding of the cycles that govern crops, animals, and water. As the afternoon wore on, the peasant shifted to more detailed tasks. He inspected smaller plots near his home, pressing soil around young plants, straightening leaning shoots, and removing weeds that threatened growth. Attention to these small details was as vital as the larger work in the main fields, both were intertwined, contributing to the overall success of the village's food supply. Each action required observation, patience, and care, a quiet testament to the knowledge accumulated over generations. By late afternoon, the sun began its gradual descent, casting golden light across the furrows and canals. The oxen, having labored steadily for hours, were guided back toward the pen, moving with deliberate, tired steps. The peasant checked each animal carefully, ensuring no signs of strain or injury, scattering feed and water for the evening. Even as fatigue pressed upon him, he observed with meticulous care, aware that the well-being of the animals directly influenced the land and the crops. Pausing briefly to survey the land, the peasant reflected on the day's work. The furrows were straight, the irrigation flowed evenly, and the crops stood nourished and upright. His hands were calloused, muscles sore, yet there was a quiet satisfaction in the visible results of his labor. The rhythm of human effort, animal cooperation, and natural cycles had produced balance and continuity. The village, with its coordinated labor and careful attention to the land, remained a living testament to the enduring patterns of life in Sumer, and the peasant, despite exhaustion, felt a profound connection to this ongoing rhythm. As the sun lowered further, painting the plains in warm golden tones, the peasant moved among the fields with careful attention. The furrows, shaped by hours of labor, stood in straight lines, and the young shoots of barley and wheat swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. Each plant, each ridge of soil, reflected his steady hand and the flow of water he had guided with precision. The rhythm of the day, repeated countless times over generations, created a harmony between human effort, animals, and the land itself. The oxen, sturdy and patient, were gradually led toward shaded areas near the canal embankments. Their breathing was deep and steady, muscles relaxing after hours of coordinated work. The peasant adjusted yokes, checked hooves, and ensured that no strain or discomfort had gone unnoticed. Nearby, goats and sheep nibbled at the grass, occasionally lifting their heads to look toward him. Each animal's behavior informed his actions, requiring a keen eye and practiced intuition to maintain both safety and productivity. Irrigation channels, the lifelines of the village, were inspected once more. The sun's warmth had caused subtle shifts in water flow, and the peasant moved carefully along the edges, pressing mud into minor gaps and repositioning reeds. Ensuring that each furrow received the correct amount of water was an intricate task, demanding constant observation and a delicate touch. Every adjustment mattered, the balance of life for crops and animals depended upon these precise interventions. The village beyond the fields had begun its own transition into evening. Women carried water from distant wells, tending to small plots and preparing meals for families. Children ran errands or gathered firewood, their energy bright against the backdrop of the setting sun. Men finished work in distant fields, inspecting irrigation or guiding oxen back to pens. The peasant, observing from his plot, felt a quiet pride in being part of this network of labor. Each individual contributed to the collective survival, and his efforts were inseparable from those of the community. Returning to the small garden near his dwelling, he pressed soil around young plants, straightened bent stalks, and removed weeds. Even these modest tasks held importance. The yield from this garden would sustain his family directly, and attention to small details reinforced his skill and awareness. Simultaneously, he monitored the animals, ensuring that goats and sheep had access to water and shade, and that no stray wandered from the pen. His work, though repetitive and physically demanding, maintained the delicate balance of life, intertwining human effort with natural cycles in seamless continuity. As shadows lengthened across the fields, the peasant allowed himself a brief pause, leaning on the plow and surveying the land. The furrows stretched in precise lines, water flowed through channels as intended, and crops stood upright and nourished. The animals rested nearby, breathing evenly under the cooling air. The village, viewed from this vantage point, appeared as a living organism, each part functioning in quiet coordination. This moment of observation reinforced both purpose and pride, survival, continuity, and harmony had been preserved through diligent attention. By the time the sun dipped further, the peasant guided the oxen fully back to the pen. He checked each animal carefully, scattering fodder and ensuring access to water. The goats and sheep settled nearby, their movements slower, eyes half closed in the cooling air. The day's labor was nearly complete, and a sense of quiet satisfaction settled over him. Each task performed, from furrow to canal to animal care, was a contribution to the enduring rhythms of Sumerian life, a testament to the interdependence of humans, animals, and the land they cultivated. As the sun sank lower, the village was bathed in soft, golden light. The peasant moved slowly among the fields, performing final inspections. The furrows he had plowed earlier glistened slightly where water reflected the fading sunlight, and the crops, barley and wheat, stood upright, nourished and healthy. Even in these quiet moments, the balance between labor, observation, and natural cycles demanded careful attention. Small adjustments to water flow or soil placement could make the difference between a thriving crop and a struggling one, and he was meticulous in ensuring that no detail went overlooked. The oxen, now fully rested, were guided to their pen, their steady breathing and calm movements reflecting hours of cooperative work. The peasant checked each animal's hooves, yoke, and general condition, ensuring they were unharmed and ready for the next day. The goats and sheep had begun to settle, nuzzling one another or grazing quietly in the shaded areas. Their safety and well-being were critical. The village's survival depended not only on crops but also on the animals that provided milk, meat, and labor. Each motion, each adjustment, was an essential part of maintaining the rhythm of life. Irrigation channels received final attention. The peasant moved along the edges, pressing mud into minor gaps, adjusting reeds, and confirming that water reached every furrow evenly. The subtle flow of water mirrored the cycles of the day, rising, peaking, and gradually calming as sunlight faded. Water management was an art and a science, demanding not only strength and precision but also intuition and foresight. Any oversight could lead to wasted resources, weakened plants, or disrupted schedules, so he approached this task with deliberate care and experience-honed skill. Nearby, the village's quieter activities began, women tending small garden plots, preparing simple evening meals, and checking on children, men completing minor tasks, adjusting fences or tools, and guiding animals to pens, children finishing errands or gathering firewood. From his vantage point, the peasant observed this web of interdependence, a living network of labor and care. Every action, though modest on its own, contributed to the overall balance and continuity of village life. He felt connected to each of these movements, understanding that survival relied on coordination, vigilance, and the shared rhythm of effort. The peasant walked to the small garden near his home, ensuring the soil was properly pressed around young plants, weeds removed, and sunlight unobstructed. Every plant mattered, every detail was significant. Nearby, goats and sheep grazed under his watchful eye, occasionally nudged gently to maintain order and access to water. Even in these final tasks of the day, the interwoven balance of human effort, animal behavior, and natural cycles was evident. The labor of the day had created harmony, and it was his responsibility to preserve it through careful observation and minor adjustments. As the sun finally began to dip below the horizon, shadows lengthened, and the air cooled. The peasant paused, leaning on the plow and surveying the fields, canals, and animals. The straight furrows, flowing water, and upright crops reflected hours of dedicated labor. The animals rested, the village prepared for evening, and the interconnected rhythms of life persisted undisturbed. The peasant felt a quiet satisfaction, a recognition that each movement, each careful gesture, had contributed to continuity and survival. The day's work, though exhausting, had preserved balance, ensured nourishment, and reinforced the enduring cycle of life in Sumer. As evening deepened, the village settled into a quiet rhythm, the golden light fading into soft purples and blues. The peasant guided the last of his oxen to the pen, ensuring they were comfortably positioned and had access to water and fodder. Their breathing was slow, calm, and steady after the long hours of labor. Nearby, the goats and sheep grazed quietly in the remaining patches of sunlight, moving lazily under his watchful eye. Even in this closing stage of the day, vigilance remained necessary. A stray animal or a misdirected channel could disrupt the balance painstakingly maintained throughout the day. The canals, critical arteries of life, were inspected one final time. The peasant walked along their edges, pressing mud where needed, straightening reeds, and confirming that water reached each section of the fields evenly. The flow had slowed naturally as the sun dropped, but minor adjustments ensured that no crop was left thirsty. Even as fatigue tugged at his limbs, he moved with deliberate care, aware that the stability of the land, and the survival of both animals and crops, relied on the precision of his actions. Within his small home, preparations for the evening meal were underway. The peasant checked stored grains, ensuring that none had been disturbed by insects or dampness. He arranged simple containers of pulses and herbs, noting what would be needed for the following day. Every task, though modest, reflected the ongoing cycle of care that sustained life. Attention to detail, organization, and forward planning intertwined seamlessly with labor and observation. Outside, the village's sounds were subdued but alive. Women carried water to small garden plots or prepared food, children completed minor errands, and men concluded their daily work, tending to fences, tools, or distant plots. The peasant's gaze swept across the village, appreciating the coordinated effort of each individual. Each person, animal, and plant was part of an intricate web of interdependence, a network of action and vigilance that maintained the equilibrium necessary for survival. Returning to his garden near the dwelling, he pressed soil gently around young shoots, ensuring their roots were secure and protected. Weeds were removed, leaning stalks straightened, and small adjustments made to maximize sunlight exposure. Goats and sheep, now grazing under cooler conditions, were guided as needed to prevent damage to plants. The interconnection of labor and observation, of human effort and natural cycles, was clear in every careful motion. Even as the day drew to a close, the peasant's work reinforced the continuity and balance that had defined his life for years. As twilight settled, he paused to survey his fields and animals. Furrows ran straight, irrigation flowed evenly, and crops stood upright and nourished. The animals rested, the village hummed softly with the muted activities of evening, and the land itself seemed to exhale, reflecting the culmination of a day's effort. A quiet satisfaction filled the peasant. The meticulous labor, the constant attention, and the careful management of resources had ensured harmony and survival. He felt part of a continuum, a link in a chain of generations that had maintained life in Sumer, each day a repeat and reinforcement of the last. Finally, as darkness fully enveloped the village, he returned to his home, prepared a simple meal, and settled near the hearth. The warmth and comfort of the space offered a brief respite from the sun-warmed fields. Muscles relaxed, hands rested, and his mind allowed itself a moment of reflection. The day was complete, the rhythm of labor and care maintained, and the cycle of life in Sumer continued undisturbed. Even in rest, he remained connected to the land, the animals, and the community, a living part of the enduring harmony that defined the village and its people. Night fully settled over the village, and the last traces of sunlight faded into a deep indigo sky sprinkled with stars. The peasant, seated near the hearth inside his dwelling, allowed himself to relax fully for the first time since dawn. The small fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the walls and illuminating the tools and containers that reflected a day of careful labor. The smells of warmed grain and dried herbs mingled in the air, grounding him in the familiar rhythms of domestic life. Though physically exhausted, his mind replayed the day's work, observing successes, noting small adjustments for tomorrow, and reflecting on the subtle harmony maintained across his fields and livestock. Outside, the village had quieted almost completely. Only the occasional bleat of a goat or rustle of reeds along the canal broke the silence. The canals glimmered faintly in the starlight, their water flowing steadily, a silent testament to the care that had guided it throughout the day. The peasants' animals rested peacefully in their pens, calm after hours of labor, each movement slow and measured. Even at rest, the life of the village continued its quiet rhythm, a subtle interplay between human attentiveness and natural cycles. The peasant moved through minor evening routines, checking food stores and ensuring water was ready for the animals overnight. He inspected small garden plots near the dwelling, pressing soil gently around young plants and removing stray weeds. Each movement, though small, was a continuation of the vigilance that defined Sumerian life, a careful stewardship of resources, animals, and crops that ensured survival from one day to the next. In these quiet hours, attention and care were as essential as the labor performed in sunlight. Sitting again near the hearth, he reflected on the continuity of daily work. The straight furrows, flowing irrigation channels, healthy crops, and rested animals were all tangible outcomes of a day's effort, evidence of the harmony achieved through persistence, observation, and skill. Even in the stillness of night, the peasant felt connected to the land, to the rhythm of life that had been passed down through generations, and to the broader community whose survival depended on collective effort. Sleep approached gradually. The peasant allowed his body to sink into the straw mat, muscles relaxing, mind easing from the constant attention of daylight. Yet his rest was tempered by an intuitive awareness of the surroundings, the soft flow of water, the subtle sounds of animals, and the distant, muted life of the village. Even in slumber, the connections between labor, observation, and survival persisted, reinforcing skills and knowledge acquired over a lifetime. Dreams mirrored the day's labor, guiding oxen, tending crops, adjusting water, and ensuring the balance of life across the fields. The village lay in hushed repose, a living system sustained by attention, labor, and coordination. The stars above mirrored the orderly structure of furrows below, each small element contributing to the whole. The peasant, embraced by night and the calm of rest, embodied this balance, a single thread in the intricate tapestry of life in Sumer. The cycle of work and vigilance, labor and rest, observation and adjustment, had been completed for the day, yet remained poised to begin again with the rising sun. Finally, as the hearth's embers cooled and the last flickers of light faded, the peasant drifted fully into sleep. The land, the animals, and the village rested alongside him, a quiet harmony maintained by care, diligence, and continuity. Night held the promise of renewal, the assurance that tomorrow, as always, the cycle of life, labor, and survival would continue, guided by human hands and the enduring rhythm of the natural world. As the deepest night enveloped the village, the peasant lay fully at rest on his straw mat. The hearth had cooled to faint embers, casting only the softest shadows across the walls of his small dwelling. Outside, the canals shimmered faintly under the starlight, their water flowing silently, reflecting the moon's pale glow. The animals, guided and tended throughout the day, were quiet, each resting in a secure corner of the village. The world seemed paused in a delicate equilibrium, a momentary calm that bridged the day's labor and the dawn yet to come. Even in complete rest, the peasant's connection to life's cycles persisted. His body relaxed, yet his mind replayed the day's work, the careful alignment of furrows, the flow of water through channels, the guidance of oxen, the tending of crops, and the watchfulness over livestock. These memories were more than recollection, they were reinforcement of skill, subtle mental adjustments that would inform the next day's labor. Years of experience had woven observation, attention, and intuition into an inseparable pattern, so that even sleep maintained the continuity of his knowledge and care. The village around him breathed quietly, a living system of interdependent lives. The rustle of leaves in a distant tree, the soft bleat of a goat settling for the night, the faint trickle of water over small reeds, all were reminders that life, though paused, continued in cycles. The peasant's work, once completed for the day, had preserved balance, irrigation channels flowed steadily, crops were upright and nourished, and animals rested safely. The careful harmony of human effort and natural cycles extended even into the night, maintained by his diligence and the ongoing rhythm of Sumerian life. Dreams took shape, reflecting the day's labor in a continuous loop of motion and reflection. He saw himself guiding oxen along furrows, pressing soil around tender shoots, adjusting water flow, and watching the sun move across the sky. The repetition in dreams mirrored the repetition of daily life, yet each iteration was slightly refined, the subconscious reinforcing skill, observation, and foresight. Even as unconsciousness deepened, these dreams were a form of quiet training, connecting past knowledge with the anticipation of tomorrow's tasks. The quiet of the night was profound. Stars sparkled across the sky, each a small point of permanence against the shifting cycles below. The village was calm, fields rested, canals flowed, and animals slept, each component linked in a fragile but enduring balance. The peasant's day, with all its labor, attentiveness, and care, had contributed to the ongoing survival of his family and community. In this moment, all was stable, nurtured by hands and eyes that had worked steadily from sunrise to sunset. Finally, the peasant sank into the deepest sleep, a rest uninterrupted and complete. The cycles of life in Sumer continued outside and around him, water moving through the channels, crops swaying in the gentle night breeze, animals breathing rhythmically in their pens. The village slept as a single organism, each part sustaining the others. And in the quiet darkness, the peasant rested, confident in the knowledge that with the rising sun, he would awaken to begin again, guided by the same rhythms, responsibilities, and continuity that had defined his life for countless days. The night held both completion and promise, the day's labor fulfilled, the balance maintained, and the assurance that tomorrow would repeat the eternal cycle of observation, care, and survival in harmony with the land. Life in Sumer, constant and enduring, continued seamlessly, with the peasant as its steady, attentive heart.